Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about Brexit and UK politics. Will Scotland become independent from Great Britain? Well, First Minister Humza Yousaf now wants to use the next election and the results of his Scottish National Party, the SNP, as a kind of yardstick for further steps. He therefore wants to enshrine a break from the Union in the party manifesto. And with this, the Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf wants to use the next election result as a benchmark for his independence efforts. If the SNP wins the most seats in Scotland in the British general election, which will probably take place about the end of 2024, he will see this as a mandate for negotiations with the British central government about secession. That's what Yousaf said. He called for this goal to be enshrined in the party manifesto. He rejected the suggestion that a majority of votes would be necessary for this at the SNP annual conference on Sunday in Aberdeen. Let us not fall into a trap of setting a bar for ourselves that no other party would set, he says. In an election, a majority of seats counts as a victory. It's that simple. Westminster is denying Scotland a democratic referendum, said the First Minister, referring to the British government district of Westminster in London. If there is no new referendum, the result of the parliamentary election in Scotland should serve as an indication, so to speak. In 2014, people in the northernmost part of the UK voted by a narrow majority for union with Great Britain. And the central government in London therefore refuses to hold a new referendum, although the situation has changed. The Scottish government, on the other hand, argues that the initial situation has fundamentally changed with Brexit, which a clear majority of Scots rejected in 2016. They want to lead an independent Scotland back into the EU. In surveys, supporters and opponents of secession are roughly balanced at the moment. Supporters of independence in Scotland demonstrated with a kind of a human chain for separation from the United Kingdom recently as well. The pro-independence newspaper The National reported thousands of participants on Saturday. Photos showed, among other things, how people stood with Scottish flags on a bridge in the city of Glasgow and along a canal. The aim was a chain of freedom over a good 100 kilometers from Bowling Harbour west of Glasgow to the capital Edinburgh. According to organisers' estimates, around 77,000 people were needed to achieve this. As I said earlier, First Minister Yousaf wants to present a proposal for an independence strategy at the annual conference of the Scottish National Party, the SNP, which begins this Sunday in Aberdeen. Nicola Sturgeon's successor wants the SNP to recognise its own majority in Scotland as a mandate for independence. And you know my stance on this. And they want to hold this, so to speak, as a token for the negotiations with the central government in London to finally get one. But the SNP is in a few problems at the moment because the SNP has been in a serious crisis since Sturgeon's resignation. The party is being investigated for alleged financial tricks. Longtime First Minister Sturgeon and her husband, the former SNP CEO Peter Morrell, were temporarily arrested. But the SNP has to work on their own reputation first. You all know my stand on a second Scottish referendum. I mean, you can see that as well. I absolutely believe that the Scottish people have the right to another referendum because of the changed circumstances. And Brexit really did this. In 2014, the main argument was vote no on independence or vote against independence so that you can stay in the EU. And 2 years later, the rest of the country, in many parts, voted to leave this EU. The only thing why many Scots wanted to stay in the Union. And of course, such a changed situation make it really legit to demand another referendum. And of course, I know why the central government in London doesn't agree to it, and they have to agree to it. I talked about the court rulings, etc., often enough on this channel. But the people of Scotland deserve a second referendum. What the SNP will be able to do is another point here. We saw in the by-election that they lost that. There must have been some local things involved there as well. The reasons, for example, why this by-election had to happen at all. But it still might be a sign that the SNP might lose a number of seats to Labour in the next general election, and because of all the scandals surrounding the SNP at the moment. And so they have to work on their reputation quickly, not to damage the independent movement. I also often talked about the prospects for Scotland to joining the EU, and that it is not a matter of weeks if they become independent so that they can join the EU. But if the people in Scotland decide, it's a voluntary union. So they joined voluntarily into that union at some point. They must be able to leave. And at the moment, it's more like being held hostage because the government in London says no to a referendum. So that's the most important points here from my point of view. But the SNP has to work hard because at the moment it doesn't look good for them and the election results. So we will have to keep an eye on the SNP reputation as well until next year. Nevertheless, if you want to know more about Brexit or UK politics, the next video is right here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.